Thank you for, I say thank you for the prize. It was such a wonderful gift. Um, so yes, a little bit about me. So I'm living in Long Island City with my wife and my dog. And I grew up in Connecticut. I grew up in the small town of Chester. And my parents are both actually fine artists. And so art is in my blood. Um, my schooling includes the Lyme Academy of Fine Art, SVA, in New York, as well as a year at an atelier in Brooklyn with a painter named Andy Reiss. Very good classes about color, which I loved. And after that, I got my MFA at the New York Academy of Art, and that was I went back to school for that, and that finished in 2020. So to talk about my art, I would first like to explain, or I'd like to frame it this way. I'm going to start with a question that I've asked myself, and that is, why do I paint? Fundamental, and it's a good question. Why do I paint? I've discovered that I am fundamentally moved by beauty and by wonder. It's been that way through my life. The subject matter of things is not as really moving to me as maybe what you'd call the formal qualities in work. Work always has a narrative, but it has to be more than a narrative to be beautiful. So on the train ride here, I was thinking about this and sitting next to the window, and things were kind of going by really quickly outside, And it was beautiful. It was nice. It wasn't beautiful, but it was pleasant. And then suddenly the land opened up, and there was a stretch of water, and there was like little boats and docks and trees and the sky in the distance. And then the light hit it a certain way, and I was like, oh my gosh! I was like, wow! I didn't really know how to describe what that was. And I thought, that's what beauty is. Beauty is something that you can't really describe, but it's so powerful. And then I kept looking out the window, and the regular little heartbeat of the boom, boom, boom were going by. And that little view it was a bit of an abstraction. I knew what it was, but it was like just the way it was composed and the way I looked at it at the moment, it stayed with me. Kept on going in the train, and it kept on staying with me. It lingered in my mind. And that's what beauty does. The content of the trees, the houses, the names of things didn't matter. It was that feeling that remained in me. It was regenerating in my brain. And I'm talking to you about that now. That's why it's beauty. I was thinking I could look out of another window, look across the way and see a view, and that might be similar, but it's a different vantage point. It's not the same lighting and whatever. So it's like you encounter beauty only in certain moments, in certain ways. And I find that in nature, and I can find that in art. A lot of artists are great because they can create beauty. So in my practice also, I find when I create art, there's a conversation going on. There's a dialogue going on. And it includes a bit of what I was talking about, which is I perceived something when I looked out that window, and it spoke to me powerfully, and it was regenerated in my mind. That's half the story. When I'm in my studio, I have a still life. We'll talk about these. I light it a certain way, and I compose it a certain way until it moves me. And then the second half of that process happens where I express my creativity onto the canvas. So there's this cyclical thing going on. I'm experiencing beauty. It goes into my eyes, into my mind. It travels through my hand to my brush and onto the canvas. and then I'm critiquing the work on the canvas, and I'm looking back and forth to the subject matter. Suddenly, the artwork on the canvas takes a life of its own. I'm not simply copying. I'm seeing and I'm interpreting at the same time. So my painting becomes an interpretation of what I'm seeing. It's not a copy. It's not what we do. What artists shouldn't think about doing is just copying. It's really something else. It's perceiving and savoring it. So there's that communication that happens. And to do that, I found it takes a certain ability to be in the present moment, to value the moment, to be able to still oneself. You could call it contemplation or something like that, to be so still as to appreciate and to create. So that's the way I've been working for a while, a long time, what I find that I appreciate. So I was in grad school. I went back to grad school later in life. And that moment that I was talking about that is so nourishing and powerful, the pandemic happened in this middle of the 2 years. The city closed down, the school went remote. People are banging on pots and pans out the window, all the first responders. You heard news about this and that and things shutting. Oh my gosh. That was not easy. My moment was shaken. I was like, my inspiration, wow, what are we going to do? So that awakened in me a memory of a feeling similar that I had when I was 13, when my parents told me that I was in a car accident when I was 4. And it could affect my life. Sorry. So it was like a pandemic happened in my childhood too. So what happened after that was I visited my family lived in the same house I grew up in. And in the basement, there were a lot of boxes, and I was going through them. And I came upon one that had all my childhood drawings. My mom, who isn't doing well right now, she wrote my age on the back of them all. And I realized that during that time when I was so young, I had drawn these pieces. Give me a moment. And they were wonderful. The drawings were just full of life. They were so full of resilience. And I collaborated with that child for my thesis project to paint again those drawings. So I was reclaiming my resilience, and I was reclaiming my love of beauty. And that's what created this. Kind of hard to talk about, as you can see, but meaningful because I love beauty and I love wonder. And it was hard for me to do this, to do the paintings. It's been challenging for me. It's a joy to paint, and it was hard to meet that moment again. And the pandemic brought it out. But so much, it's an appreciation of my family, my parents, their artists, their ability, my ability. So it's like I think what I gained from it is the idea of, you know, find your resilience. We all have it somewhere, you know, those roots of strength, even in difficulty, and to reclaim it. And that's, it's this contradiction, you know, it's like, can you have joy in sorrow? Can you have them work together? And yes. So that's why I think it's been hard for me to talk about it, but it's not because it's a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. And ironically, it's hard to talk about, can be. So that's the heart of all this. And of course, then there's a whole other chapter of things. There's the technique. There's my love of direct painting. But in school, I learned indirect painting. And if any of you are painters, there's a bit of a difference between that. There's something called glazing when you paint indirectly. And direct painting is more when you're just using a lot of paint and you're putting it down. So I learned enough from indirect painting. My first love has always been direct painting, but I kind of blend them together. Does anybody here know the difference? Am I talking to people who know the difference between the two generally? Okay. The shorthand of it is most of the shadows are glazing, and then most of everything in the light is direct painting. So what I really enjoy is color. I could call myself a colorist. I've called myself a colorist before because I'm moved by color, but also a formalist because it's not just the content that I do it. Well, the strange thing in this whole series, this is also a lot about content. So it brings content and beauty, content and the content and the form together. So I'm not an absolutist formalist, but I'm not purely an absolutist about content either. And often in the art world, there are different tensions between like, oh, you don't have to do, there's people who don't want to worry about anything about skill or technique, and it's just about the idea. And then there are people who are like, no, it's all about the quality and forget the idea. So there's a whole lot of things in between that too. And I occupy probably maybe a little of both, a little of the middle. And so that's a bit about my technique, and as far as technique goes, when I work, someone asked a question here. I think it might have been you, and it was, so how do you paint these? So basically, I'll just explain. So I have these drawings, these childhood drawings, and I have a really nice cool light. There's a warm light and cool light. I don't know what these lights are, but the sky is a cool light. When it comes in, there's a blueness to it. So I have the light source that I have in my studio is a cool light. And I take the childhood drawing, and you can see some of them have like the little pins in them or the tape. And I pin them on. I set the light up, and I recall something I want to point out, which is in the creative process for me, the execution is the important part. It is very important. It's very important, but it's not the most important part. Ironically, to me, in a funny, mysterious way, it's everything I do before I start. It's the hour and a half or 3 hours that I do composing a piece, finding a vantage point, putting a light on it a certain way, not giving in to an easy, oh, I'll just do it this way because I'm here, or it's just this way. There is something nice about that, but it's like finding your vantage point is really important because it has to move you. If it moves you, you're going to commit to it. That's my attitude. If you love it, you're not going to let it go. If you love it and it starts to kind of like it's not reaching the level that you want to, you're not going to really want to. You should never give up because you put too much time caring about it. So I'm going to do everything I can to make this thing like work, which is different than forcing it. You don't want something to be over forced, but you want to like love it to life, you know? And so that's how I look at that. And so when I set up a piece, I have the light on it. There's the preliminary, you know, kind of honeymoon that I would say that you have with that I have with a piece, and I sense that yes, this is pictured in my mind already. It's complete. I see what I want, but then you have to do it. You have to execute your piece, and the honeymoon might end, and then the work begins. And honestly, after I start beginning a piece, I go through a long period of just doubt and a little bit of angst. I'm like, oh my gosh, is this going to work? Am I really? Oh my, I'm seriously like, I fret a little bit over it. And then I'm like, okay, slow down, you know, pick it up again, and let's do this together. It's like that child with me. Okay, let's just do this. And then I start to work on it more and more. And I say, I work at 3-hour intervals, usually, whether it's outside, which I've done, working outside, or if I'm working in the studio, 3-hour intervals. I could do 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, or sometimes when I'm really busy, it might be longer. It might be even a 6-hour period if I'm going nuts and trying to get something done. But it takes, you know, 3-hour intervals, and that could take a month. Like, and it's like I'm not painting necessarily every day, but in fact, I can't believe I didn't work on it. I worked on it like a couple days a week or 3 days a week, but that took a year. After grad school, I just did one painting. I did that one. I just took my time. Other paintings took a lot. That could have taken a month. The one that I did over here. As I got going and I got a whole lot better, the one over here called Ghost number 3, the big one behind you, that one, it took a month and a half. I mean, you get better when you have to do a lot of paintings. So I was able to do that one fairly quickly, to my surprise. And I was very, very happy about that one. I did a smaller one of it too. I like them both, although they're a little different. And I did that one probably in a week. You know, that was probably that little one over next to, on the right side, the smaller version of that. Yeah, so that's how long they take. That's how long they take. And then once I think it's done, I just sit with it. I just sit with it and I listen. That's the other part of it, is sort of like what you put into a painting, but then you also really have to listen and let it tell you what it wants. And you respond to it. And then you wait and you talk again. And it's just this waiting. And finally, when it stops talking, you're like, it's done. Yeah, it's like, I'm done too. So, yeah, that's how it can work. But it is certainly an investment. And you know what? It's like, if I put my heart into this much, literally a space this big on a painting could take 3 hours, right? And then maybe a little longer. At the very end, I might go over part of it again, but like 3 hours. So instead of looking at the entire painting as something daunting to do, you have to kind of be good to the space you're in and just build it and trust, and then building it, and then step back and edit it. And you know, if it's not working, what can I do to fix it and stuff? So there's this constant dialogue. And if in a certain sense, I find that the dialogue and appreciation I have with my art facilitates my interest in people, because it's a give and take. It's a dialogue. It's an appreciation. It's being able to edit and to, so there's something very there's a, well, you could say it's a theory, or there's the theory of beauty of aesthetics, which actually, if I'll just say, Immanuel Kant wrote the aesthetic judgment of beauty, and he relates beauty ultimately toward making the world better in simple, like how you engage in the world. Like it has implications beyond just you. It's how you engage with others. It's like that light bulb that went on when I was looking out the window on the train when I saw that view. That kind of experience I can share with people around me. It's like that's in a sense the place for beauty. I can bring it into, it can feed me to enrich others, and it becomes a social thing. And I think the world needs more of that. Maybe that's a good place to stop. It does. Thank you. And, and if anyone has, sure.
I noticed in most of the paintings, there's two things. There's the child's drawing, and then there's sort of your discovery of the object of the child's drawing. And then over here, it's different, and then that's the child drawing.
Yes.
So where does that fall in the process of?
That was a bit of an anomaly, but funny you say that, because my dad, I mentioned, they're artists. He's a sculptor, and he taught at Yale, among other places, and everything. And he's elderly now, but I asked him what's his favorite painting, and he went, "I like that one." And it's interesting you bring it up, because I mean, it looks to him more mysterious and elusive and kind of like strange, and that's wonderful. And um, and I could continue with that too. I also like the others, but there's not liking one over another. But I could do more like that. In fact, the very first, I was telling somebody in here before, right over where Roger's standing, the painting next to him, it's called Self-Portrait, okay, because it has a child. It's not it's of me. It's not me. But when I was in grad school, one of the painting classes, that's the very first one I put a childhood drawing in, was about, the instructor said he wanted us to do paintings that are self-portraits without ourselves in it. And so somehow you had to think about how you're going to show yourself. So a lot of people did reflections of themselves or such. And then because I realized I had these drawings, and I thought, you know what, they represent me in a time, you know, and that it is me in a way. So that's the first one. So that one is actually almost like this one, in that it is a still life. This is a still life. Well, there's a hand and holding something, but I began to, so between that one and this one, I then and that's a still life. And I did the paper. So I don't know. Should we vote on it? What you like better? I think it's good to have them all. So yeah.
Curious, painting that you have in the gap in front.
Yes.
Where it's translucent. And
yes.
You have light that's actually seeping through the paper, and you see your hand, and then your hand is abstracted.
Yes.
I mean, that is gorgeous, but how did you
So okay, so another point that actually, so I'm a perceptual painter. I paint, I don't, this, you know, this is the, it's not, it is not controversial in the scope of things, but it is in a certain way in the art, some art world, but like people use photographs and others don't, right? Well, I don't use photographs. I just love looking. My eyes see, and I love the light. I love light, the color of light, and I love color and everything. So it's a blessing and a curse in a way, because so for that painting, okay, that's, you know, I'm so glad you reminded me, because I forgot that that's part of the show. Even though it's out there, it's like easy to forget. Edwin Dickinson, a painter who you might be familiar with from back when, he did a painting. I realized he did a drawing, or you'd call it a painting, of a hand holding a childhood drawing, and behind it there is another drawing on a table. And so I thought, oh my gosh, like that's wonderful, because I've tried. So what if I held the drawing, right? What if I held it? And I got the light, and I fixed it up and everything like that. Two things I want to talk about that painting. I don't want to lose that train of thought, but that painting there, I should have mentioned, it's a screaming dragon on the, I forgot the title, but there's a dragon on the page. There's a figure on the bottom lying there. It's cut out of paper that I made as a child. It's this thing. and behind it there's a car that I put in there. Well, I was in a car accident. That's what happened to me. And so that was almost me kind of like loving the beauty in that moment. So that could have tied into what I talked about earlier. What was I just saying about before that? Oh, holding it. So the difficulty is that, and the same with this one over here that I was holding that one with, that little, which I love the light on that paper that's being held. So when you paint, you're painting here, you have your canvas, and usually I have a rag in this hand that I'm like cleaning my brush with and everything. Well, I'm holding this paper. I'm holding that paper in my hand. And so I'm really looking, I'm mixing a color, I'm looking, I'm painting, I'm cleaning the brush, I'm putting the drawing down, grabbing the rag, cleaning the brush, picking up the paper again, getting it in the right light, and then looking, and then mixing another color, looking, and then painting again. It was, I won't use the expletive, right? It was not easy. But I knew that it was going to be lovely, and I did it because that's almost the way I'm inclined to work. So I couldn't not do it. And doing that one too, I had to constantly pick up the paper and put it down because I was just infatuated with the light and the color. And I didn't want to just take a photograph and then just copy the photograph. Some people can do work with, it's completely legit. I'm not saying that working from photos isn't. People have to discover what they work. It's like use the faculties you have to the best of your ability. And that's all I'm trying to do with my work. And that's the way, other people would be like, well, why, if it's, when I was at the New York Academy of Art, they have studios and everything for you to work in. And on it, well, to me, because I'm working from life all the time, I couldn't understand it. Like people were looking at their cell phones, looking at images, and painting from their cell phones. And I probably sound very old-fashioned, but like I was like, what? but that is legitimate too, because there's a lot of beautiful painting that happens that way. But I never felt the pleasure in that, and I just think that. I think finding pleasure in this life, in this world, by what you encounter, not online, not on, in the world, in the air you breathe, and the things you see and touch, is what we have to just really appreciate more, and use that other stuff too, and appreciate that. But that's just my bias there. So, but thanks for the question.
I don't know if somebody is recording your talk today.
I think it is.
I hope so.
Oh.
Because your words are part of creating this feeling and the images of your work. I feel like you've created a space that exists out there between and here, and it's quite beautiful. And your words are quite marvelous in that melange.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And of course, you probably didn't know this, but I was I was nervous before all this. I was challenged by Roger because he said, "Oh, we've had people here before, and they have notes," and I kind of told them they shouldn't, and this and that. And I thought, okay, I'll accept that challenge. But like, I've done it before. I wrote a lot of this down. I kind of tried to synthesize it, and just it's all personal. But like, I'm not the best. I guess I criticize myself. It's like maybe growing up I wasn't the best speaker, but I've worked more on it, and so that's very lovely. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Are you done with this body of work, or is there more? That's the first part.
Okay.
The second part is, if you're done, have an idea
I see. So yeah, this body of work is completely took me by surprise. To tell you a little bit about what I did before, I mean, I worked from life all the time. There's a different project I did, and I'll just describe it briefly because it actually has to do with paper. Okay, so it's a longer story. It's a whole other thing, but. I decided when I moved to New York City that I wanted to draw the city. I found it so fascinating, and I thought I want to draw it in a different way. So I thought it would be wonderful if I used the front page of the New York Times as my canvas, and that I would draw the city on the city. And you have to see the pieces maybe to understand them, but they're cityscapes, and so the typography comes through the paper, and it's kind of a dialogue of my narrative upon the narrative of the world and of the city, and the contradictions and the complexities and all that. Like I'm part of. It was a way. It relates to a different story in my life of in a certain sense reintegrating after being out of the country a long time back into this city. So like I'm not really doing that anymore. So that was a phase. I think I want to continue doing this, not to this extent. Like every year, I'm not going to produce another body of unless they're all sold and they want another show. That's definitely why. But I will continue to do it, and have it be, because it is sort of like it's autobiographical. It's and that's lovely. And I think that so not only have I done that whole newspaper series, but I've painted, from life outside, and it's really about, my love of color and composition, and in fact, before I came upon this idea, my thesis was basically just going to be that I find beauty where I find it. I don't really. It's so funny. I mean, and I think it's complete. I remember an instructor, the Andy Reiss, one of my instructors, said, well, what do you want to say? What do you want to say? What are you trying to say? And it's kind of like, it's not that I didn't have anything to say, but I did have something to say. I didn't know it was more about beauty than it was about like being able to think about it. I'm going to be doing drawings about sneakers. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't narrow it down to a thing. Like I'm going to just do like, and I respect completely. I want to, who's coming to mind? Katie Kollwitz, for instance, if you're familiar with her work, she did these wonderful drawings. I think her husband was a doctor in World War I, if I'm correct. And she did these amazing drawings of, the horror, or you'd think of Goya did, or anything social or political. It's like, why not? If you find your inspiration from it, follow your inspiration from it. It's all very. So that's a long way of saying, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'll do this and other things. Yeah. Yeah. That's somebody I was like, oh gosh, my gosh. I would love to do figurative. I've done figurative work and stuff, but like, I mean, you have to, after you go through grad school and everything, or anyway, even if you're not, I mean, like the way I would do figures is the way she has done figures, or as I mentioned, Edwin Dickinson, is that right? No, not Edwin Dickinson. I'm mixing him up. I mentioned another artist before, but like for me, if I was going to draw a figure, I might want to look at the figure from above. I don't want to do just like a figure. I mean, for learning purposes, yes, and there are a lot of beautiful, like, let's put the model on a stand and paint them with the light on. But like, it's about, I like the figure in unusual places that are actually familiar, but set in a very unfamiliar way. Again, I take my time before I paint a piece to really set it up in a way. Like when I was working outside in New York and doing these cityscapes, I'd see other artists out there working on the street and stuff, and I'd have my own little criticisms. So this one painter was set right in front of a restaurant, drawing the restaurant. I walked by in my head, I'm like, what? I'm like, of all the places, like, you think that's the most beautiful, or are you just there to get attention? You know what I mean? It's like aesthetically, wouldn't it have been more interesting if you were like above or like way down the block and looking for that one? So when I would do cityscapes, and I would be on my rollerblades a lot in the city at the time, I would wait until I was moved by a view and be like, oh my gosh. I'd make note of it in my head, and I'd keep on going. And every time I was on my rollerblades, I'd go, oh, where am I on like West 4th and something? I'd be like, okay, oh, there's that view. I'm going to go look at it again. And then I'd stop and look at it and think, well, but what if I move back here a little bit more? Oh my gosh, it looks so different. Like maybe I don't like that view as much. And so you know, you kind of have, it's that whole so if I were to do work with figures, I'd have to pay models a lot, and I don't have that kind of money. Like, that's my problem. You know, like, I would love to do the figure and stuff like that. Another thing I did with that whole series of newspaper pieces, just to remind you, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Paris several times. And so I worked on the Le Monde newspaper, and I did Paris on Paris. The dream was to do all major cities on all major newspapers, and I could travel the world, you know. That didn't happen. I got to Paris. Paris, New York, and maybe, where else did I go? I forgot. Maybe just one other quick city. So, you know, I continually look for inspiration. It's just one way of working. It's the way I'm built, you know. It's the way and I've at other points in my life, I'd beat myself up. Like, can't you think of like something that's, you know, and I would seriously try to think of ideas, but I always came back to this sort of the value of my perception, the value of our perception, you know. And also the word poetry comes to mind, is trying to make art that is poetic, as opposed to like that view out the window was like a piece of poetry. All the things going by quickly was like prose. It was descriptive, okay, houses, trees, this and that. And so whatever I do, I try to wait until I feel it first, and then I draw it. And then when I'm done drawing it, after that anguish that I talked about that I went through with the bigger paintings, in the middle I got, oh my gosh, I'd begin to break through. And by the end of it, which could take months, you know, suddenly I'd get this rush of like, oh my gosh. That first inspirational feeling of like, wow, it would hit me at the end. And then I'd know it's done. Like, it did it. So it's just interesting. Everyone has a different process. That's mine. Good. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.